Hello and welcome to the Read to Know podcast, where the goal is to actually remember what you read so then you can better apply it to your life. On this podcast, we go through a book one chapter at a time, and then we actually practice remembering what we've read. So if you want to follow along, we're currently working our way through Bob Goff's book, Dream Big. I'm Zach Brown, and my friend Chris Yarber is joining me to help discuss and break down this book. Also, if you're on Apple Podcasts, it would be huge if you left a rating and review for us. It would help out a ton. If you're not on Apple Podcasts, no worries. Just send this to a friend who might be interested. Anyway, thanks again for listening and enjoy the conversation. You know, the one thing that bubbly sparkling water, the brand, has over other brands like LaCroix is that on their little, on the tabs that you open the can with, there's little messages.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
are they different per can?
Yeah, they are. What's yours say?
Yo.
Yo, mine says yo too. But there's other ones that say like oh hi. Does that lime one say oh hi? Yeah. Or hey.
Yeah.
Just things like that, which is just kind of funny. But
it's like it's speaking to you as you're taking a sip.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yo, what's up, man?
It's like, yo to you, orange bubbly. Anyway, this podcast is about to turn into a sparkling water podcast.
It is. If you
maybe the first of its kind.
Right. If you ever see a tab that says Sleepwalking, then that would be interesting.
Yeah.
Concerning the chapter we're reading today, bad awkward segue into Dream Big, Bob Goff, chapter 9, Sleepwalking.
The title of this chapter is Sleepwalking. Yes, being fully awake looks a lot like staying completely engaged. And that's what we're talking about here, staying completely engaged. And basically what he says here is that do whatever you have to do to stay completely engaged is basically what it comes down to. And reading these chapters, reading the last chapter and this chapter, it kind of seems like a 1-2 punch in change. Yes. Right? Like they're very similarly correlated, very kind of similar, but when he's talking about change in the last chapter, it's a little different when he talks about change in this chapter.
Right.
And the reason this is called Sleepwalking is he starts out with this idea, again, based off a personal story, that we won't get into here. But the idea is that oftentimes we find ourselves, quote unquote, sleepwalking throughout our day and just kind of going through the motions, not really fully engaged and fully alive, fully present in our day-to-day moments. And we can find ourselves in those situations fairly often. And whether that's from just being in the same routine over and over again and just kind of zoning out, going through the motions, or maybe we're doing something that that we're not fully excited about.
Right.
And so that's what's causing us to kind of just start sleepwalking.
Yeah, he says in here that you can seem really active and you can look really engaged and active with other people. But are you really sleepwalking? And really we're the only ones that know that about ourselves. Right. And one way as we're seeking our ambitions and our dreams, one thing that he says in this chapter is to always be anticipating. And so that's a big thing for him. And that's one sign, one tell as to whether or not you are sleepwalking is, are you anticipating, especially anticipating these changes that he talks about in chapter 8. But like I said, we can seem like we're active to other people, but really we're sleepwalking. I know that I have moments in just about every single day of my life that's true. What's even scarier is to do some self-reflection and to ask ourselves, are there any parts of our life that we do that? Are there any relationships that we do this in? Are there any major parts in our careers that we do this in? And this sleepwalking, in a sense, is really what keeps us from our ambitions and our dreams a lot of times.
Yeah. And he says instead of sleepwalking, what if instead, in stark contrast to that, we were expectant every day, anticipating something amazing to happen, basically. looking at the little things and trying to make the most of kind of every situation that you're in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it comes down to. How do you make the most of the situation that you're in, what you're doing right there that minute? How do you make the most of it, and how do you expect the best out of it?
Yeah.
And that's what he's talking about here, being completely engaged in everything that you do. And then he kind of moves on here, and if that's not the case, if you are sleepwalking, what can you do to get yourself out of the funk?
Right.
That's what he talks about.
He says this is just as hard as it is easy, but he says you need to wake up, is what he says, which sounds easy at first, but then you really begin to think about, okay, how am I going to do that? Not that he leaves us there in this chapter, but that's just as difficult as it is easy to say.
This is where he brings in that second idea of change. So different from the last chapter, it's basically like, whatever you got to do to wake yourself up, do it. So if you got to change your routine, if you got to, he said, let people move in with you.
Right. Yeah.
If you have to take a trip, if you have to
make a job change.
Right. Quit your job. If you have to switch majors in school, whatever you got to do to wake yourself up and to be excited about. I think it's kind of like, it's not like we should chase excitement, but I think everything should feel fresh. You got to try and make everything feel fresh in a way.
Right.
And that could be carried too far, I think, but not
that there's uselessness in mundane activities that we do, or repetitious activities that we do. What he's afraid of is that we're doing these things each and every single day, and they're really no longer serving the purpose that they once were because we're sleepwalking through them.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to put it. So he continues, and I like how he kind of pivots here. It's kind of interesting. It almost seems out of place, but we were talking about it before the podcast. This last kind of section of this chapter, he talks about rest.
Yeah.
Which is almost the opposite of what he was talking about before that, because he was talking about sleepwalking and trying to get out of that, wake up. But then he talks about rest. I think oftentimes for a lot of us, especially people like you and me, where we're Enneagram 1 and 3, and we often, especially, our types, we have to be doing something. Always. Right. We have to be doing something. And it's hard to rest, especially for me, I think.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to just sit and chill and don't do anything for a day or something.
Yeah.
I'm always doing something. Right. And he said maybe that break the cycle, stop sleepwalking is just that you need some more rest. And you're not fully rested. And he says that's how some people get to sleepwalking. Not because necessarily they're doing something mundane, but they've just worn themselves out to the point where they're just sleepwalking through things that they once were excited about.
Yeah.
So maybe you need a rest. Maybe you need a break. Take a break, get away, and then come back when you're fully rested and jump back into it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're listening to this, trying to guess what's going to recharge your ambitions and chasing your dreams, maybe taking a break is what you need, because sometimes that leads to these failures that we face is fatigue, is tiredness. That's what leads to that. Right. Something that we don't really take a lot of time to consider, but I think it's something that we should, because that's what may be stopping us in our tracks.
Yeah, and what's hard to do, and what he mentions, is that we shouldn't feel bad about resting.
No.
But that's hard to do.
It's so hard to feel guilty about it.
If you're anything like me, or probably anything like Chris, you have that thought. It's hard to do. And he said there's nothing wrong with taking a day.
No.
He said resting in the hammock,
right.
And just taking the day off and not doing anything.
Right. And it's purposeful, and your rest is purposeful.
Right.
It has a purpose, and so it's not lazy, it's not meaningless. Right. It's purposeful rest.
Right. He even mentions there's wisdom in rest, or there's wisdom in rest.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's an important thing to grasp, because I think it's for people who are ambitious naturally, it's a hard thing to get. And I think that's why he takes a whole section of this chapter and talks about that.
Right.
Is because for people who are ambitious, for people who naturally want to dream big, it's hard to do that. And that's the thing. I think it's like, if I'm resting, for me personally, this is my thought process. If I'm resting, if I'm not working on this stuff, then I'm falling behind in that thing I want to accomplish.
Right.
Or maybe even not I'm falling behind, but I'm like I'm losing progress that I could be making. You know? If I spent that time doing that, I could make that progress. I could get there. I could get farther along quicker.
Right.
If I didn't.
if we were to take time to rest, how much more would we be recharged to work effectively
Right.
and really, in a sense, make up for the time that we've lost. Because when we do work as fatigued and sleepwalking, in a sense, we may be getting a lot of things done, but maybe it's not at the quality in
Yep.
which we could be getting it
Right.
done.
And he says doing that pushes towards burnout.
Yeah.
Which is not a good thing.
No.
And he also talks about rest in this way too, is that rest can be used in that sense as to just take a break, get away from work. But it also is used strategically in that you're resting, but you're also thinking.
Yes.
And it's a thinking tool as well. It's a time where you can think, ponder, figure out maybe what your next move is, what you're deciding, making decisions. Resting is a good time for those things.
Yeah. There's this book that I love. It's probably my favorite leadership book by Clay Scroggins, which is How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And he talks about in that book creating creative space. So taking time, and he may use the words to think critically, but taking time and removing yourself from all other activities simply for the purpose of critical thinking, which is something that you can do in a time of rest, where you stop your activities, you stop everything that you're doing with your hands, and you just sit there, have some time to think creatively, to think outside the box, to think critically, to help push you forward in your ambitions in the future.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's a good chapter.
Yeah.
It's one that hits me hard. You know what I mean? I gotta try. That's what it's something. Gotta try and rest more.
That's right.
And stop. Don't push myself so hard to the point where I'm sleepwalking through these things that I may want to do and find exciting. But anyway, let's open the book.
Let's open it up. He says here, he starts off with a story about his son who is a sleepwalker. And he says here at the beginning that it's one thing to sleepwalk in the morning. It's another thing entirely to sleepwalk in the middle of the day.
Yep.
People do it all the time, he says. Maybe you do too. And then he says sleepwalking describes most of our lives. So, of course, already covered that pretty well.
Right. He says the painful thing here, the painful truth about sleepwalking is that it may be getting in the way of your ambitions, but then he says actually it's more sinister than that. It's not stopping you on the way to the starting line. It's keeping you from even getting your jersey and running shoes on. So it stops you before you're even at the point of working.
Right.
Is what sleepwalking can do. It can stop you way before you're making even any progress.
Right. And then he says, though, kind of as a next step, if you want to make progress towards your ambitions, which I think we said at the beginning, that we live in constant anticipation of what might happen next. Yeah. He says that to look constantly for opportunities to give your ambition some lift. This will help us, in a sense, lift out of this sleepwalking, is that we look with anticipation, we look forward, and
then ready to take action on
right
it.
Ready to take action. Right.
Yeah, people who effectively anticipate opportunities don't just sit on the edge of the chair hoping. I like this visual here. They stack books on the chair and stand up on top of them looking for an opportunity. Try it. The view will be great.
Right. And really what that allows us to do is allows us to figure out what is keeping us stuck when we do that. He says that you may have to break some routines, identify some stress in your life, and get the tools you need to clarify your ambitions. And then he goes through a list of questions like, do you need to downsize? Do you need to have that conversation with him or with her? Do you need to make this major job change, as we talked about before?
Right. And it's a balance. That's what he's kind of getting at here, is that there's this balance between almost being aggressive about it, being aggressive about your ambitions and your goals, but then also being able to have the balance of pulling back and resting when you need to.
Right.
As he's talking about here. So it's a balance between those two things. And he says here, the truth is you're probably going to need to make a couple of easy things uncomfortable. That's how you kind of shake things up and stop sleepwalking. And I think that's a really interesting idea. How often do we try to make easy things uncomfortable? I don't know. That's just something to think about, to
Yeah,
ponder.
that's a
I
mind-blowing
think.
thought. Yeah. That takes some time to think about.
I really don't have any extra thoughts to go along with that. Just
I do
that
not either.
I think
have to think about
that's something
that.
I'm going to be thinking about for a while. I think I'm going to be mulling that
Right.
over.
And you can think about that and mull over that while you rest,
You're right. Exactly.
as we talked about, as you covered so well.
Right. If you want to press through the resistance you're facing, you need to identify your own tells like a good poker player. Mm-hmm. So if you're finding yourself starting to get stuck, you're starting to be sleepwalking, or you are sleepwalking. What are the tells? What's triggering that?
Right. Yeah.
That's what he's saying here.
Yeah. What are the signs? And they may all be different for us. But what does that look like? Because I'm sure if we were to take the time to think about it, we could all identify some of even leading up to it.
Right.
That this is beginning to happen, so that we can make that change that we need
Because it's not
to make.
it's not one day you're not one day you're fully awake and engaged. The next day you're sleepwalking.
Yeah.
It's not that dynamic. It's not that immediate of a change. It's a slow, gradual change. And like you said, there's some tell signs that show up before we fully get to that point, probably.
Right.
And you got to figure that out and try and stop it beforehand, so that you don't waste time, in a sense.
Right. And yeah. And one way really to stop that is to get in this habit of making rest. I didn't know if you had anything else before that.
Yeah, no, he just
section.
continues there and gives examples about what that would be to shake
Right.
things up, changing majors, starting a new job, taking some time off, etc.
Right, yeah. And I think that's why he ends with this section, which you already covered pretty well.
It's probably
which is
the one that
section
most of us need to hear the most. Is probably
Yes.
why he spends a whole section talking about rest.
Right, exactly. You said this. He says that rest is wise. He says that preparation is wisdom.
Right. It says it feels counterintuitive, but it's true. Sometimes the best way to make progress is by sitting still.
Yes. And he says also that part of the process of realizing your ambitions is recognizing when you need a break. Mm-hmm. So that really is, and that's why I love that he has a section on this, that really is
Right.
part of the process of recognizing
a couple
your
more
dreams.
quotes from this section that I really like.
Uh-huh.
He says, some days are about gathering strength instead of exerting it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like this, don't stop thinking that taking care of yourself, lying down for a nap, lounging in the hammock, or sitting on a park bench means you're slacking. Stop reading the junk mail telling you this.
Mm-hmm.
How many, I just think that's a funny picture because, we all get those emails that are like, you got to be, or those things wherever, you got to be hustling
Yeah.
24/7.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very much pushed in our culture, which is one reason
Yeah.
why we do so terribly at it sometimes. Is it's so pushed on us,
Right.
and oftentimes how we're judged as people is really expressed in
How hard we're working.
Yeah, how hard we're working.
Yep. The downfall is that people who refuse to rest eventually run out of steam. And that's what we're talking about, burning out potentially if you don't get the rest that you need. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, that's what's causing us to sleepwalk. Is probably often not that we're doing anything wrong, but we're doing too much
Right.
without getting proper rest.
Right.
He ends the chapter with part of the process of realizing your ambitions is recognizing when you need a break. If a break is what you need, take one. It's not just okay, it's smart. And get as much rest as you need, because then you'll know when it's time to be fully awake and get back to work. So rest up, know when you're ready to get back at it, and then once you're rested up, you can get back at it with, full of energy and ambition and energy towards that goal. Yeah, well, that's a good chapter. That's actually one of my favorite ones, I think, so far. That's been one of my favorite chapters so far.
Yeah, I think chapter 8 is a great prerequisite to it. I think this is a great follow-up. But beyond those 3 chapters with the 3 different questions,
Right.
Number 9 is a good one.
Yep, tomorrow is chapter 10, 100 calls a day. Availability is your secret weapon. Should be interesting. I'm excited to read that one.
Yeah.
Again, if you have any insights, those of you listening, if you have anything you'd like to say, add to the conversation, get at us at Read to Know Pod on all platforms, readtoknowpod@gmail.com as well. If you have anything you'd like to say, add to the conversation, join in. We'd love to hear from you. what are your thoughts?
Yes, and we may even mention it on the show. So there's always that. So continue to listen, and we appreciate you all listening or watching on YouTube. But yeah, reach out.
Yep. Thanks for listening. We'll see you tomorrow.